I've been a fish and wildlife protection officer with the state for 9 years. Stationed out of Glen Allen, which puts me in Game Management Unit 13, the Nelchina Basin, if you want to look it up. It's the most heavily hunted unit in Alaska. Moose, caribou, grizzly, Dall sheep. During season, my job is essentially traffic management with teeth. I check licenses, inspect kills, make sure people aren't wasting meat or shooting from vehicles. Off-season, the work changes. Population surveys. Transect walks. GPS collar recoveries. It's quieter. Lonelier, but not in the way people romanticize. Not some spiritual solitude. More like the kind of quiet that makes you check your satellite phone battery 3 times before you leave the truck. I need to tell someone about Marker 8. I don't mean I want to. I mean I think I need to. Because I've been carrying this for 14 months and I'm starting to notice things about myself I don't like. I'm starting to avoid decisions. I catch myself driving past the turnoff for the Tyone River Road and not remembering why I turned around. I'll be writing up a report and leave the location field blank and not notice until the next day. Something in me is learning not to go back there, and the part that concerns me is that I can't tell if that's wisdom or if it's something else. Let me just tell it straight. Unit 13 has a series of wildlife monitoring markers along the Susitna-Tyone corridor. They're nothing dramatic, 4x4 posts driven into the ground with a reflective metal tag bolted on. Numbers stamped in. They designate survey waypoints for aerial counts and ground transects. We use them to segment the unit into manageable reporting zones. Marker 1 starts near the Susitna Bridge. Marker 14 ends up past the lake. The whole string runs about 40 miles through mixed terrain, black spruce, muskeg, willow flats, a few elevated gravel benches. Marker 8 sits on a gravel bench above a drainage that feeds into a beaver pond system. Topographically unremarkable. Good sight lines in 3 directions. The kind of spot you'd pick for a rest stop during a survey walk. There's a game trail that crosses within 50 yards, which is probably why it was placed there, high traffic for ungulates. For the first 7 years of my posting, Marker 8 was just a waypoint. I've stood next to it dozens of times. Eaten lunch there. Glassed for caribou from that bench. It was a spot. Then, in March of 2 years ago, we lost a dog. That needs context. We don't typically run dogs in fish and wildlife protection. But Marcus Holt, my partner at the time, stationed out of the same Glen Allen post, had been working with a trailing hound on a poaching case. Big operation. Someone was taking moose out of season along the Tyone corridor and hauling the meat out on snow machines at night. Marcus got authorization to use his personal dog, a plot hound named Cedar, for scent tracking at suspected kill sites. If you're listening to this at night, alone, the way I think you probably are, and you find yourself coming back to stories like this one, you might consider subscribing to this channel. I don't tell people about this in person. Nobody at my post wants to talk about it. But someone should hear it. Cedar was a good dog. Disciplined. Marcus had trained him since he was a pup. Not aggressive, not skittish. The kind of dog that would hit a scent trail and just go, quiet, focused, nose down. March 14th, Marcus took Cedar out along the transect line to work a site near Marker 6 where we'd found gut piles the previous week. I was running a separate patrol that day, about 12 miles south. Standard operating. We checked in by radio at noon. Marcus said Cedar had picked up something strong heading northeast along the corridor. He was going to follow it on foot. I told him to check in by 3. He didn't check in by 3. He checked in at 4:15. I remember the time because I'd already started driving toward his last known GPS pin, which my truck's tracker system logs automatically from his unit. When he radioed, he sounded fine. Not distressed. Maybe a little quiet. He said Cedar had run ahead and he'd lost visual. He followed tracks in the snow for about 2 miles northeast. Past marker 7. Past a frozen creek bed. Then the tracks just stopped. I asked him what he meant. Tracks don't just stop. An animal can jump, can be picked up by something, taken by a predator, but you find disturbance. Blood. Wing marks from a large raptor if we're talking small game, but this was a 70-pound hound. Tracks don't just end. Marcus said, they stop at the gravel bench. The snow's clear there, wind scoured. But they don't come out the other side. He meant marker 8. I didn't think much of it at the time. Wind scour on exposed gravel benches is normal. Snow drifts and erases differently at elevation. I assumed Cedar had crossed the exposed ground and the tracks resumed somewhere Marcus hadn't checked yet. Dogs range. It was getting dark. Marcus came back without Cedar. The next day, we went together. Both trucks. We parked at the pullout near marker 6 and walked the trail in. Clear morning. Maybe 10 below, bright sky. Cedar's tracks were still visible in the snow, already starting to soften at the edges but legible. We followed them exactly as Marcus described. Northeast along the game trail. Past the creek bed. The gait was consistent, a working trot. No deviation. The dog was on a scent. Then the tracks reached the edge of the gravel bench. I looked at the bench. Maybe 40 yards across, oval, mostly bare ground with patches of snow in the lee of a few scattered boulders. Marker 8 stood dead center, its reflective tag catching the sun. No tracks crossed the bench. No tracks exited the other side. We circled the entire perimeter. The snow beyond the bench was undisturbed in every direction for as far as we could reasonably check, maybe 200 yards out. Marcus whistled. Called. Nothing. I remember standing at the edge of that bench and feeling something I couldn't name. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. The way you recognize a wrong answer on a test before you've done the math. Something about the proportions of the space felt incorrect. I said that to Marcus. He looked at me and said, "The bench looks bigger." I didn't respond. I didn't know if he was right. I hadn't measured it. But standing there, looking across 40 yards of bare gravel, I had the distinct sensation that the distance to marker 8 was longer than it should be. Like the space between the edge and the center had added something. We filed a lost dog report. We didn't file it with any mention of spatial anomaly because we're state officers, not creepypasta narrators, and writing "the ground seemed bigger" in a report is career-ending. Marcus was upset about Cedar. I was upset for him. We moved on. 3 weeks later, Denise Urquhart's moose camera went dead. Denise is a biologist with ADFNG, not a protection officer. She runs population surveys in Unit 13 using remote trail cameras. She had a camera mounted on a spruce trunk about 80 yards east of marker 8, facing the game trail crossing. Standard Reconyx unit with a satellite uplink for weekly image dumps. The camera stopped transmitting on April 2nd. Denise asked if Marcus or I could check it on our next pass. I drew the short straw. April 9th, warm for the date, maybe 25 degrees. Overcast. I snowshoed in from the trailhead. Took me about 2 hours to reach the bench. The camera was still mounted. Still pointed at the game trail. Battery indicator showed 60%. Memory card in place. No obvious damage. But when I pulled the card and checked it on my field laptop that evening, the last 2 weeks of images were wrong. Not corrupted. Not blank. Wrong. Every image, triggered by motion, time-stamped correctly, taken at the usual intervals, showed the bench. Not the game trail. The camera had been pointed at the game trail. It was still pointed at the game trail when I pulled the card. But every photograph from the last 14 days showed the bench instead. Marker 8 in the center of every frame. Same angle. Same distance. As if the camera had been moved, pointed directly at the marker, and then moved back. Except the camera hadn't been moved. The mount bolts were tight. The trunk showed no scratching. The snow around the base of the tree was undisturbed. I looked through the photos carefully. 218 images. All triggered by motion, meaning something was moving in the frame when each photo was taken. But every photo showed the same thing: empty gravel, marker 8, empty sky. No animal. No figure. Something was triggering the motion sensor on that bench. Repeatedly. Over 14 days. And it didn't show up in photographs. I mentioned it to Denise. Told her the camera was malfunctioning, pointing the wrong direction intermittently. She said she'd swap it out when she did her spring maintenance round. I didn't tell her about the motion triggers. I didn't tell her about the empty frames. I should have. May came. Snow retreated. The ground opened up. I was running standard transect surveys, walking the corridor, counting pellet groups, checking browse lines, documenting winter kill carcasses. Normal work. On May 14th, my survey path took me past marker 8. This is when things changed. The bench was green. Early spring growth, nothing unusual about that. Fireweed, new willow shoots, some grasses. But the vegetation pattern was wrong. The growth was radial. It spread outward from marker 8 in a perfect circle, about 15 feet in diameter, noticeably taller and denser than anything else on the bench. I'm not a botanist. But I've worked this landscape for nearly a decade. Plants don't grow in perfect circles. They follow drainage, they follow sun exposure, they follow disturbance patterns. This looked deliberate. Like something beneath the soil was feeding a precise area. I noted it. Took photographs. Moved on. May 22nd. Back on the same transect. The circle was larger. 20 feet in diameter now. And at the center, around the base of marker 8 itself, the vegetation had changed character. Not fireweed anymore. Something darker, a ground cover I didn't recognize. Low, fleshy, almost black-green. Growing tight against the post like it was embracing it. I knelt at the edge of the circle. The air smelled wrong. Not rotten. Not chemical. Something biological but unfamiliar, sweet and mineral at the same time. Like blood mixed with river clay. I did not step inside the circle. I don't know why. I had no reason not to. It was 6 feet away. I could have walked to the marker and touched it. I had every professional reason to. I should have been examining the growth, taking samples, photographing the base of the post. But I didn't. Something in my body said no. Not in my mind. My mind was curious. My body said no. My legs would not step forward. I felt that once before, during a grisly encounter on the Chitina, when a sow charged to 10 yards and stopped. The freeze. The deep brain absolute refusal to move. I stood at the edge of that circle for probably 2 full minutes. Then I backed up. Walked to my truck. Drove back to the post. That evening I called Marcus. He was off duty, at home. I told him about the growth circle. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know what I haven't told you?" "What?" Cedar's collar came back. I asked him what he meant. He said on May 19th, 3 days before my visit, he'd driven out to the bench alone. He hadn't told me. He'd been doing that since March, he admitted. Going out on his off days. Looking for Cedar. On May 19th, he found the collar. Not on the bench. Not near marker 8. He found it on the dashboard of his truck when he got back from walking the perimeter. Sitting neatly on the center of his dashboard. The truck had been locked. Cedar's collar. No damage. No blood. Clean. The buckle still fastened in the same hole Cedar wore it at. 11:47 p.m. Marcus's voice on the phone. Flat. Quiet. "I don't think Cedar's dead." He said it without inflection. The way you'd say the time. And I didn't ask him to explain because I already knew what he meant. If something had killed Cedar, there would be remains. Fur. A bone. Something. If something had taken the collar off the dog, it would need to unbuckle it or break it. The collar was intact. Buckled. Something had removed that collar the way a person would remove it from a living dog. And then it put it in Marcus's truck. I told Marcus not to go back. He said he wouldn't. I believed him at the time. June. The days stretched to 20 hours of light. I kept running transects, but I started routing around the bench. I told myself it was efficient, there was nothing to count there anyway, the game trail crossing had gone dead since winter. No pellet groups on the bench. No browse. No carcasses. The animals were avoiding it. That should have been in my reports, but I left it out. I noted reduced game trail activity in the corridor generally and attributed it to seasonal distribution patterns. That's technically true. It's also technically a lie. June 14th. I was working a different section, 3 miles south, near marker 5, when I heard a sound from the north. Not a sound I can easily describe. Not a howl. Not mechanical. Somewhere between a vibration and a tone. Low. Sustained. Maybe 5 seconds. Like the ground itself was exhaling. It came from the direction of marker 8. I had my GPS. I logged my position. Time, 2:34 p.m. Broad daylight. Warm. Mosquitoes everywhere. Nothing about the conditions was threatening. But I stood still and listened, and the silence that followed that sound was different from the silence that preceded it. Normally the boreal forest is full of noise. White-crowned sparrows. Wind in spruce. Squirrels. Water. After that sound, there was nothing. For maybe 90 seconds, the world was absolutely silent. Then the birds resumed, distant at first, like they were restarting. I told Denise about the dead game trail. Framed it as a management observation. She said she'd noticed it too. Her replacement camera near marker 8 had captured 0 wildlife since installation. She'd assumed a malfunction. Then she said something that made me stop. The weird thing is, it's still triggering. I'm getting images every day. But there's nothing in them. Same as before. Motion-triggered photographs of an empty bench. Something moving. Nothing visible. I asked her if she'd been out there recently to check. She said no. She said she'd planned to go the following week. I told her not to. She asked why. I couldn't explain it. I said something about bear activity in the corridor. A sow with cubs I'd documented nearby. Denise is experienced enough to handle bears, but she accepted the excuse without pushing. I think she heard something in my voice. July. Marcus stopped answering my radio calls for 2 days. When he came back on, he said he'd been out of range doing backcountry checks. I pulled his GPS logs from the truck tracker system. He'd been parked at the marker 6 pullout for 31 hours. I confronted him at the post. He looked normal. Healthy. Not sleep-deprived or stressed. He just looked at me with this expression I couldn't read and said, "I can hear cedar." Not at the bench. Not through the ground. He said he could hear cedar at night, from his house in Glen Allen. 50 miles from marker 8. A dog trotting. The specific sound of cedar's nails on a wood floor. But he didn't have wood floors. He had carpet. "It's underneath the carpet," he said. "It sounds like cedar is trotting around in a room directly below mine. But there's no basement." I asked him if he'd pulled up the carpet. He said no. Then he said, "I think if I pull it up, I'll see the bench." He said that calmly. Factually. The way you'd say, "I think if I open that door, there'll be a hallway." I told our supervisor that Marcus needed a psych evaluation. Framed it as stress-related. The poaching case had been long, losing cedar was a blow, the isolation of the posting was getting to him. Supervisor agreed. Marcus was put on administrative leave pending review. He didn't fight it. The night before he left for Anchorage, he called me at home. It was late, 10:30, which in July in Alaska is still light, but the quality of light was gray. Overcast. Rain on the windows. He said, "You need to go check marker 8. I asked why. "The circle is bigger. I could see it from the road last time. You could see it from the pullout. The color's wrong." I told him I would. I didn't mean it. Co-op, that's what he called me, short for Cooper, my last name. "Coop, there's something else." The sound from under my floor. It stopped 2 days ago. I waited. It stopped when I agreed to leave. He didn't say anything else. He hung up. He drove to Anchorage the next morning. I haven't spoken to him since. He's on indefinite leave. I'm told he's fine. That's the word they used. Fine. I didn't go check marker 8. 3 weeks passed. August now. Hunting season approaching. I had work to do, pre-season patrols, equipment checks, coordination with other units. Busy. Easy to avoid a gravel bench 40 miles up a dirt road. August 9th. I was refueling at the Glen Allen Tesoro when a man approached my truck. Civilian. Maybe 60. Weathered face. Carhartt jacket. He asked if I was the wildlife officer for Unit 13. I said I was one of them. He said, "There's something wrong up by that survey marker. The one on the bench past the creek." I asked him how he knew about the markers. He said he'd been hunting that corridor for 20 years. He knew every post by number. He said marker 8 had always been a good spot to glass from. "When did you last go up there?" I asked. 3 days ago. Scouting for season. What did you see? He looked at my truck for a moment. Then at me. The ground's moving. He said it the way Marcus said things toward the end. Calm. Factual. No dramatic emphasis. Like describing weather. Not like an earthquake. Not shaking. Just settling. Real slow. Like the bench is sinking from the center. And the marker's gone down with it. I asked him if he'd walked onto the bench. He said no. He said his dog wouldn't go near it. He had a Springer Spaniel in the cab of his truck. The dog had refused to leave the vehicle when they parked at the pullout. I thanked him. Took his name and number. Told him I'd check it out. This time, I meant it. August 12th, clear morning. 50 degrees. I drove out alone. Parked at the pullout near marker 6. The pullout has a clear sight line northwest toward the bench, maybe a quarter-mile away, elevated slightly, visible above the tree-line from that angle. I could see it from the truck. The bench was darker than the surrounding landscape. The growth circle, which had been 20 feet across in May, now appeared to cover most of the visible surface. Maybe 100 feet across. The vegetation was uniformly dark, almost black from this distance. And at the center, where marker 8 should have been standing 4 feet above the ground. The marker was at ground level. Not broken. Not fallen over. The reflective tag was still visible, catching sunlight from its position flush with the surface of the bench. The post had sunk. Or the ground had risen around it. 4 feet of post, gone below grade. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes. Then I got out. I walked the trail toward the bench. Slowly. Recording on my body camera. GPS logging my track. The radio in my vest on channel 3, open. As I approached, the smell reached me first. That same sweet mineral odor from May, but stronger. Concentrated. Not unpleasant, exactly, but wrong in the way that a fruit can smell too sweet when it's seconds from rot. The dark vegetation started about 80 feet from center now. I was wrong about the 100-foot estimate from the truck. Up close, the edge of the growth circle was further out than I'd thought. The plants were unlike anything in my field experience. Low, matted, with leaves that seemed to have no veins. Smooth and dark like organ tissue. They grew in overlapping patterns, tight to the ground, covering the gravel completely. I stopped at the edge. I looked toward the center. The marker's reflective tag sat flush with the surface, surrounded by that dark growth. The ground wasn't flat anymore. It was concave. A shallow depression, barely perceptible, maybe 18 inches of drop from the edge to the center across 40 feet of radius. The ground was moving. Not visibly. Not in any way I could watch and confirm. But between one blink and the next, the surface seemed to have settled fractionally. Like watching a clock's minute hand, You can't see it move, but it's not where it was. I heard something. Not from the bench. From below the bench. Deep. Impossibly deep. Not the low tone from June. Something else. Rhythmic. Slow. A heartbeat. Muffled by distance and earth, but unmistakable in pattern. A biological rhythm. Maybe one beat every 4 seconds. Coming from underneath a gravel bench in the middle of the Alaskan interior. I backed up. I drove to the post. I called my supervisor. I told him I needed to report an environmental anomaly at Marker 8. Possible subsidence. Possible contamination from an unknown source. I recommended restricting access to the corridor between Markers 7 and 9 pending investigation. He asked what kind of contamination. I said, biological. Unknown origin. I'm not qualified to assess it. He said he'd contact ADFNG and the Department of Environmental Conservation. He said to mark the area and keep people out until someone with the right expertise could get there. I went back the next day with caution tape and stakes. I roped off the trailhead access at Marker 6 and posted a closure notice. Generic language, area closed due to ongoing wildlife management activity. Nothing that would attract curiosity. While I was hammering the last stake at the far end of the closure, about 200 yards south of the bench, I heard something move in the dark vegetation behind me. Not footsteps. Not an animal moving through brush. A sliding sound. Like something heavy being dragged across a smooth surface. Wet. I turned around. Nothing. The dark growth stretched back toward the center of the bench, uniform and still. The air was motionless. No wind. But a section of the growth, maybe 15 feet from where I stood, was flattened. Pressed down in a line. Like something had laid across it and then lifted away. The pressed vegetation was already springing back, slowly, like memory foam recovering. I left. That was August 13th. The investigation team arrived on August 20th. 3 people from DEC. 1 from ADFNG. A geologist from UAF. I led them in. Standard procedure, I was the site officer, responsible for safety and access. We parked at the pullout. I watched their faces when they saw the bench from the distance. The geologist said, "What is that?" The DEC lead said, "How long has this been here?" I told them what I knew. Gave them a timeline. March through August. I left out Marcus's personal details, the collar, the sounds, the floor. I framed it as a progressive environmental change I'd been monitoring. They walked in. Full PPE, respirators, nitrile gloves, boot covers. They had soil sampling equipment, air quality monitors, a ground-penetrating radar unit. I stayed at the perimeter. They spent 4 hours on the bench. I watched them from the edge. They moved slowly, methodically. They took samples. They ran the GPR unit in a grid pattern across the surface. They photographed extensively. When they came back to the perimeter, the DEC lead pulled off her respirator and looked at me. "Officer Cooper." "Yes." "Has anyone reported missing persons in this area?" I said no. "Not recently." The poaching suspect was still at large, but that was a criminal matter, not a missing persons case. I asked why. She didn't answer directly. She asked when Marcus had last been at the site. I told her July. She asked if Marcus was available to speak with. I said he was on leave in Anchorage. Then she said, the GPR is showing a cavity beneath the bench. Large. Maybe 40 feet across, 12 feet deep. It's not geological, the walls are too regular. I asked what was in the cavity. She looked at the geologist. The geologist looked at his tablet where the GPR data was displayed. We don't know, he said. The radar isn't penetrating the floor of the cavity. Something is absorbing the signal. They packed up. They told me to maintain the closure. They said they'd be back with more equipment. Seismographs. A bore camera. Possibly a drill team. They never came back. September 4th. I called DEC. The lead, her name was Margolis, answered. She said the investigation was being handed to a different agency. She wouldn't say which one. She said the site closure should remain in effect indefinitely. She said I should not enter the perimeter I'd established. I asked about the GPR data. She said it had been forwarded. I asked to whom. I can't discuss that, Officer Cooper. Is there something alive under that bench? She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, the vegetation samples came back. The lab couldn't identify them. Not as any known species. Not as plant or fungal. The cellular structure is, they described it as organized but not differentiated. Like a single organism pretending to be a ground cover. She paused. Don't go back there. Even to maintain the closure. Just don't go near it. I haven't been back. But here's what I need you to understand. Here's why I'm telling this. Last month, April of this year, a hunter called the Glen Allen Post to report that the closure signs near Marker 6 had been removed. All of them. Stakes pulled, tape gone. No trace they'd ever been there. I was instructed not to replace them. By my own supervisor. He said the site had been cleared by the investigating agency. He said the closure was no longer necessary. He said I should resume normal patrols in the corridor, including Marker 8. I asked for documentation. A written clearance. An email. Anything. He said it was verbal. I pulled up my truck's GPS logs from the past month. My supervisor's vehicle, which I have access to through the fleet tracker, had not been anywhere near the corridor. Whoever told him it was clear, told him remotely. Without visiting. I haven't gone back. I've routed my patrols to avoid the corridor entirely. I've told the 2 seasonal officers who started this spring to stay south of Marker 6 for bear safety reasons. But last week, one of them, a kid named Draper, 23, first year, told me he'd gone up to Marker 8 on his own. He said, "Hey, that bench up past the creek. Pretty spot. Good place to glass." I asked if he'd noticed anything unusual. He said no. He said the ground was all gravel. Normal vegetation. Marker standing straight. He'd eaten lunch sitting right next to the post. I looked at him carefully. He seemed fine. Normal. Healthy. Did you hear anything? I asked. He thought about it. Just wind, he said. Then, actually, you know what was weird? There was a dog. I could hear a dog trotting somewhere nearby. Figured someone's hunting dog had gotten loose. I didn't say anything. That night I lay in bed and thought about what Margolis said. A single organism pretending to be a ground cover. I thought about the cavity. 40 feet across. The marker sinking. The heartbeat sound. And then I thought about Draper saying the bench looked normal. Gravel. Marker upright. Because the last time I saw it, the last time I was there with my own eyes, the marker was flush with the ground. The growth covered everything. The bench was concave. Either it reversed itself completely in 8 months. Or Draper didn't see what I saw. Or Draper didn't stand where he thinks he stood. I don't know which of those is true. But I know that Cedar's collar appeared in a locked truck. I know Marcus heard something under a floor that didn't have a basement. I know that cameras photograph motion where nothing is visible. I know the ground had a heartbeat. And I know that something down there took a 70-pound dog without leaving a single mark on the snow, and then returned the collar, clean and buckled, as if to say, I know you're looking. I don't go near marker 8. Not after dark. Not during the day. Not ever. But last night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and my boots were by the front door. Laced. My truck keys were on the seat of my truck. The engine was cold, but the GPS log showed it had been started at 1:47 a.m. The last recorded position was the marker 6 pullout. My odometer confirms the mileage. I don't remember any of it. And when I checked the bottoms of my boots this morning, the soles were clean. No mud. No gravel. Just a thin layer of something dark. Smooth. Organic. It wiped away easily, but where it had been, the rubber was slightly warm. Like it had been breathing against my feet. I don't know what's under that bench. I don't know what happened to Cedar. I don't know what Marcus was hearing, or whether the version of that bench that Draper saw is the same one I'd see if I went back. But I know this, I've started hearing it too. Not a dog. Not Cedar. My own footsteps. From underneath my floor. At night. Pacing exactly the route I walk every morning, kitchen, hallway, front door. But at 2 a.m. In a house with no basement. And each night, they sound a little closer to the surface. I started documenting it. Not officially, I don't have a form for this. But in a field notebook, the kind I use for transect observations. Blue hardcover, waterproof paper. I log the date, the time I wake, what I hear, and how long it lasts. April 28, 2:47 a.m. Footsteps below floor. Kitchen area. Duration, approximately 4 minutes. Pattern, slow walk, pause at sink, walk to hallway, pause at front door, return to kitchen. Repeat twice. April 30th, 2:31 a.m. Same pattern. Louder. Added detail, sound of a boot heel catching on something. A stumble. Then correction. Duration, 6 minutes. May 2nd. 2:14 a.m. Same route. Faster pace. No pauses. 7 minutes. Ended with what sounded like a hand on the underside of the floor, a single flat press. Directly beneath my bed. I live in a slab-on-grade house. Poured concrete foundation. No crawl space. No basement. No cavity between my floor and the earth. I checked the original building plans at the borough assessor's office. 4-inch reinforced slab, directly on compacted gravel fill, directly on native soil. There is nowhere beneath my floor for anything to walk. And yet. May 5th. I rented a stud finder with a built-in density scanner from the hardware store in town. Not professional equipment, just a DeWalt unit meant for finding pipes and wiring in walls. But it has a deep scan mode that can detect changes in material density behind surfaces. I ran it across my bedroom floor. Across the hallway. Across the kitchen. Normal readings everywhere. Concrete slab. Consistent density. No voids. Except one spot. In the hallway, approximately 3 feet from the front door, the scanner showed a density change. A lighter reading. As if the concrete was thinner there, or as if something beneath it was less dense than the surrounding material. The area was roughly 18 inches in diameter. I marked it with painter's tape. The next night, May 6th, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway at 1:30 a.m. with my back against the wall, a flashlight, and my notebook. I waited. 2:08 a.m. The sound began. From the kitchen this time, the far end of the route. Slow footsteps. Measured. The exact cadence of my morning walk. My gait. My weight distribution. I know this because I paid attention to the timing between steps, and it was mine. I walk with a slightly longer stride on my left side, an old knee thing from college basketball. The sound matched it. The steps moved down the hallway toward me. I was sitting directly beside the painter's tape mark. The steps reached me. Stopped. Directly below me. Directly below the density anomaly. Then, and I want to be precise about this because precision is all I have, I felt warmth. Not from the air. From the floor. Through the carpet and the pad and the concrete. A warmth that had no business being there. May in Glen Allen is still cold at night. My thermostat was set to 60. The floor should have been cool. But the spot beneath the tape was warm. Not hot. Not dramatic. Just present. The temperature of skin. The steps did not continue to the front door that night. They stopped where I was. And the warmth lasted until I stood up at 2:40 a.m. and walked to the kitchen to get water. When I came back, it was gone. Floor cold. Normal. I wrote everything down. May 8th. I called UAF's geology department. Asked if there were any known geothermal features in the Glen Allen area. The person I spoke with said no, nearest geothermal activity was over near the Wrangles, volcanic in origin, and well documented. Nothing under the Copper River Basin residential area. I asked about subsurface biological activity that could generate heat. They asked what I meant. I said I was just curious about soil temperature anomalies. They said permafrost dynamics could create local temperature variations near thaw boundaries, but not in a slab-on-grade residential structure. They said if I was experiencing unusual floor temperatures, I should check my radiant heating system. I don't have radiant heating. May 9th, something new. I came home from patrol at 6 in the evening. Normal day, checked some fishing licenses down at the Clutina, wrote 2 citations for overlimit on reds, ate lunch in my truck. Normal. When I walked in my front door, the smell was there. That smell. The sweet mineral smell from the bench. Faint. Not overpowering. But unmistakable. Like someone had opened a window to marker 8 and let the air in for just a moment before closing it again. I searched the entire house. Every room. Every closet. Under sinks. Behind the fridge. Nothing visible. No source. The smell was strongest in the hallway. Near the tape mark. I stood over the tape mark and breathed in. It was coming from below. Through the floor. Through 4 inches of reinforced concrete. I almost pulled up the carpet. I had my hand on the edge of it, right where it meets the baseboard in the hallway. I could have pulled it back. Exposed the concrete. Put my face close to it and confirmed. But Marcus's voice was in my head. I think if I pull it up, I'll see the bench. I let go of the carpet. The smell faded over the next hour. By the time I went to bed, it was gone. But I lay there in the dark and thought about what Margolis said about the tissue samples. Organized but not differentiated. A single organism pretending to be a ground cover. And I thought about the cavity under the bench. 40 feet across. 12 feet deep. Walls too regular to be geological. And I thought about my house. Slab on grade. Built in 1987. 37 miles from Marker 8. The distance shouldn't matter. 37 miles of earth and rock and frozen ground and river gravel between here and there. Whatever is under that bench, whatever grew that circle and swallowed that marker and took that dog, it's there. It's localized. I saw the edges of it. I saw where it stopped and normal ground began. But Cedar's collar appeared in a locked truck. And Marcus heard the dog 50 miles from the site. And my boots drove themselves to the Marker 6 pullout while I slept. And now the smell is in my hallway. May 11th. I did something I'm not sure was smart. I drove to Anchorage. 6 hours round trip. I went to the Department of Environmental Conservation office on Northern Lights Boulevard. I asked to speak with Margolis. The receptionist told me she no longer worked there. I asked when she'd left. The receptionist said she couldn't share personnel information. I asked if there was a forwarding contact for the Marker 8 investigation file. The receptionist looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. I don't have any record of that case number, she said. I gave her the file reference from my own report. She typed it in. Nothing. I gave her the date range. Nothing. I gave her Margolis's full name and the names of the 2 other DEC staff who'd been on site. I'm sorry, Officer Cooper. I don't show any of these individuals in our current or former employee database. I stood at that counter for a long time. Then I said, they were here in August. They took soil samples from a site in Unit 13. They had GPR equipment. They drove a state DEC vehicle. I have their names in my field notes. The receptionist was patient. Kind, even. She suggested I might be thinking of a different agency. Perhaps a federal team, EPA or USGS. She offered to help me track down the correct office. I thanked her and left. In my truck, I opened my field notebook to the August entries. The names were there. Margolis. Stenval. DeFrancesco. The DEC lead, the geologist, the second DEC tech. I'd written their names in my own handwriting on the day they arrived. But when I looked at the names now, sitting in a parking lot on Northern Lights Boulevard in bright May sunshine, they looked strange to me. Not wrong. Not misspelled. Just uncertain. The way a word you've written correctly can suddenly look foreign if you stare at it too long. I drove home. May 14th, 1:52 a.m. I woke to the footsteps. But this time they weren't beneath my floor. They were in my hallway. Not below. On the same level. On the carpet. In the house. The sound of my own gait. My own stride. That slightly longer left step. Walking from the kitchen toward my bedroom door. I was in bed. The door was closed. The sound approached the door. And stopped. I did not move. I did not breathe. I lay there in the dark and listened to the silence on the other side of my bedroom door, and I waited for the handle to turn. It didn't. After what felt like 10 minutes, probably 90 seconds, if I'm honest with myself, the footsteps retreated. Back down the hall. Into the kitchen. And then below. The sound descended, as if walking down stairs that don't exist, until it was under the floor again. Muffled. Distant. The usual subterranean pacing. In the morning, I checked the hallway. The carpet showed no impressions. No disturbance. But the painter's tape over the density anomaly was gone. Not peeled off. Not stuck to something else. Simply gone, as if I'd never placed it. I put new tape down. Measured the spot with a ruler and logged its position relative to the door frame, 41 inches from the front door frame, centered in the hallway width. May 15th, morning. The new tape was still there. But it had moved. I measured, 37 inches from the door frame. It had shifted 4 inches toward the front door. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't walked on it in the night. I'd gone to bed, slept, or tried to sleep, and woken at 6 to find the tape 4 inches from where I'd placed it. Either the tape moved, or the anomaly beneath it moved. And the anomaly moved toward the door. I stopped putting tape down after that. May 16th. I called Marcus's personal cell. Disconnected. I tried his Anchorage number, the one his sister's house uses, where he'd been staying. A woman answered. His sister. She said Marcus was fine. She said he was resting. She said he wasn't taking calls from work. I told her I wasn't calling about work. I told her I needed to talk to him about something personal. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he told me you might call. He said to tell you not to pull up the carpet. How did he? He said you'd know what it meant. He said it's important. Don't look at it directly. That's what he said. I asked if he'd said anything else. He said the dog is fine. She hung up. That night I didn't sleep in my house. I drove to the office and slept in the break room. Fluorescent lights on. Thermostat up to 70. The hum of the building's HVAC system running steady all night. At 2:22 a.m., I was half awake. On the couch, I heard footsteps below the break room floor. The post office is also slab on grade. I lay there and listened. The same gate. My gate. Kitchen, hallway, front door. But there was no kitchen here. No hallway. No front door. The pattern was the same regardless of the building. My morning route, replayed beneath whatever floor I happened to be sleeping on. It wasn't tied to my house. It was tied to me. May 18th, Sunday. I drove out toward the corridor. Not to marker 8. Not past marker 6. I stopped at marker 4, a good 10 miles from the bench, and got out and stood in the spruce and listened. Birdsong. Wind. Water from the Tyone drainage. Normal. But south of me, further from the bench, normal. And north of me, toward marker 8, a strange quality to the silence. Not an absence of sound, exactly. More like a pressure. The acoustic equivalent of the way your ears feel during a descent in a small plane. Something in the air was heavier in that direction. I got back in my truck. On the drive home, I noticed my odometer. I'd driven the route I always drive, Glen Allen to the Tyone corridor turnoff, north to marker 4, and back. I know the distance. 44 miles round trip from my house. The odometer showed 48. 4 extra miles I didn't drive. Or 4 extra miles the truck drove while I wasn't measuring. That night I disconnected my truck battery before I went to bed. Took the keys inside and put them in the safe. Left the GPS tracker running on its own internal battery so I could check the log in the morning. May 19, 6:45 a.m. I checked the tracker log. No movement recorded. Truck stayed in the driveway all night. Battery was still disconnected. Keys still in the safe. But my boots were by the front door. Laced. And the soles were warm. I threw the boots away. Bagged them in a black garbage sack and drove them to the transfer station and threw them in the compactor bin and watched the machinery crush them with the rest of the refuse. I bought new boots from the Carhartt store in town. Wore them home. Put them in my bedroom closet with the door shut. May 20th, morning. The new boots were by the front door. Laced. The closet door was open. The soles were clean. Cold. But when I picked them up, the left boot was heavier than the right. I turned it over. Shook it. A small amount of gravel fell out. Fine, round, river-washed gravel. The kind that makes up the surface of a bench on a hill above a beaver drainage in the Susitna-Tyone corridor. I recognized it. Not by chemical analysis. Not by mineral composition. I recognized it the way you recognize a face. That specific gravel. That color. That texture. I have walked on that gravel dozens of times over 9 years. Marker 8 gravel was in my boot. In a boot I'd bought 12 hours prior. In a house 37 miles away. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that morning. Here is what I understand. Something lives beneath that bench. It is large. It is alive. It has a heartbeat. It grows. It can take a living animal without leaving a trace and return objects to locked spaces. It can be photographed through a game camera's motion sensor but doesn't appear in the image. It has been investigated and the investigation has been erased or reclassified or denied. The people who investigated it may not exist in any verifiable database. It is aware of me. It has been aware of me since at least March of last year. Possibly longer, possibly since the first time I ate lunch on that bench 7 years ago. It knows my gait. It can replicate the sound of my footsteps precisely enough that I recognize my own walking pattern. It can move beneath any floor I sleep on, regardless of the building's construction or distance from the site. It can operate my body while I'm unconscious. It can move objects in my home. It can deposit physical material from its location into my possessions. And it is getting closer to the surface. Each night, the footsteps sound less like they're beneath the floor and more like they're in the floor. In the material itself. Like the boundary between under and inside is thinning. I don't know what happens when it reaches the surface. I don't know what happened to Cedar. I don't know what Marcus is resting from. I don't know why Draper saw a normal bench when I saw a sinkhole of dark tissue. I don't know if the investigation team was real or if the memories I have of them are something else, something planted or grown in the same way that dark vegetation grows in a perfect circle. But I know what I heard last night. May 20th, 2:03 a.m. The footsteps started in the usual place. Kitchen. My gait. My pace. Moving down the hallway toward my door. They reached the door. They stopped. And then, for the first time, the door opened. Not fast. Not violent. The handle turned slowly, the latch clicked, and the door swung inward on its hinges. The hallway beyond was dark. I could see the dim shape of the corridor. The bathroom door across the hall. The edge of the kitchen light I leave on. Nothing stood in the doorway. Nothing I could see. But the carpet at the threshold depressed. 2 impressions. Boot-shaped. My size. Pressed into the fiber as if someone of my exact weight was standing there. I watched those impressions for what felt like a very long time. Then they shifted. 1 step forward. Into my bedroom. The carpet compressed under an invisible weight, held for a moment, and released. Then another step. I was sitting up in bed. The blanket was around my waist. The room was cold. My breath was visible. Another step. Closer. The smell arrived. Sweet and mineral. Close now. Intimate. The smell of the bench, concentrated into a space the size of a person, standing 6 feet from my bed. I said, and I don't know why I said this, it wasn't planned, it came from somewhere deeper than language, I said, I know you're not me. The impression stopped. The smell held. And then, from directly in front of me, at the level where a person's chest would be if they were standing 6 feet away, I heard my own voice say, "Not yet." 2 words. My voice. My exact inflection. The way I say, "not yet," to my dog when she wants to go out before I've put my boots on. Casual. Patient. Familiar. Then the impressions retreated. Step by step. Out the door. Down the hall. Into the kitchen. And below. Descending through the floor. Gone. The smell faded over 5 minutes. I sat in my bed until dawn. This morning I drove to the post. Filed a personal leave request. 30 days. My supervisor approved it without questions. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's confirming what you already suspected. I'm leaving Glenallen tonight. I don't know where I'm going. South, I think. Somewhere with no connection to Unit 13. Somewhere with no gravel benches and no survey markers and no corridor. But I know, and this is the part one can't escape, I know it won't matter. Because it isn't under marker 8 anymore. Maybe it never was only there. Maybe the bench was just where it was close enough to the surface to be noticed. Maybe it's everywhere beneath, a single organism spread across the basin, the corridor, the whole drainage, and marker 8 was just the thin spot. The window. And now it has another thin spot. Me. Wherever I sleep. Whatever floor I stand on. It's there. It knows my route. It knows my weight. It knows my voice well enough to use it. And each night it gets one step closer to the surface. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if want is even the right framework for something like this. Maybe it doesn't want anything. Maybe it just grows toward warmth. Maybe it just grows toward repetition, toward pattern, toward rhythm, and I gave it mine freely, every morning for 9 years, walking the same route across my kitchen floor. Maybe I taught it how to be me. And now it's almost finished learning. I'm recording this because if something changes, if I stop filing reports, if I stop answering calls, if someone who looks like me and walks like me and sounds like me goes back to work at the Glen Allen Post and nobody notices a difference, I want there to be a record that says, that isn't me. Or if it is me by then, if whatever walks up through the last inch of floor and steps into my skin is close enough that the distinction doesn't register to anyone, including whatever's left of my own mind, then I want this to exist as proof that there was a moment when I still knew the difference. That moment is right now. And it's the middle of the night. And the floor beneath my feet, here in this motel room in Valdez, 119 miles from marker 8, is warm. And I can hear my own footsteps. Coming up.